I'm Steve Bishir. Bishir. Most people pronounce it wrong, but that's okay. I live in Nashville, Tennessee, primarily. I'm an engineer, mixer, producer. Producer sort of on the fringes because you sort of back into those kind of things sometimes. Primarily in the Christian industry, but I've done a lot of other stuff, doing more country stuff these days, working on some movie stuff. So it's a really varied sort of thing, and it's just a joy to be able to make records. It's one of the best things in the world. Well, probably since when I grew up as a drummer, and it's becoming a used to be drummer, which is kind of sad. But when I was growing up, I had my first multi-track kind of recording was I had two of those little Radio Shack cassettes, that are the little all buttons all on one end, really horrible mono things. I had one of those. I took it up to my bedroom and I played this drum rhythm thing, and then I took it downstairs and played the piano into another one with that playing, and mixed it by moving the mic back and forth from one tape thing, and ended up with, and I still have that recording somewhere. Sounds great too. So that was my first sort of multi-track recording, and from there I did some sound for some friends who were in bands, and always wondered why the sound for our band sounded horrible. And one there was in Tulsa, from Tulsa, some friends were in a band there, and I went down there, and they had this studio in the back of an old moving van trailer, one of those semi-trailer, and it was all covered with carpet inside, and this horrible old console, I don't even remember what kind it was, and an old 16-track analog tape machine. And the drum booth was at the very back, just big enough to put a little tiny drum kit in and stick some mics in. And that was where we did some demos for this band. And they almost got a record deal. How many millions of bands almost got a record deal? But it was fun. So from there, I went to, after I graduated from high school, I came to Belmont College in Nashville, and I have a degree in music business, or it's a bachelor's of business with music business emphasis, which just meant I spent every minute that I could in the studio doing whatever. I was engineering for some people. I was the staff engineer, so helping other people not screw up their projects. And after I graduated, I went to work, interned at a studio called Omni Sound in Nashville, and interned for 2 weeks there, and my first paid job in the music industry was cutting down the weeds in the parking lot. So it's a wonderful beginning. Everything's not glamour, but from there I met, through Omni. It was a great place to work at that time because Warner Brothers Records was across the street, and there were several producers who would they would bring in a potential new artist and do 3 sides, and then put out a single and see what happens. And if the single took off, then they'd come in and finish the record. And during that 18 months that I worked at Omni, saw Leroy Parnell and Asleep at the Wheel and a bunch of Warner Brothers and Arista artists, and then several Christian artists as well. And there was an engineer named Jeff Balding who was an engineer who worked for a producer named Brown Bannister at that time. And Jeff liked the way I aligned his tape machine. So I started going out and doing setups and stuff for Jeff, and then ended up assisting and leaving. Eventually left Omni to work for Brown, and worked for Brown for a lot of years, and amongst other people. But he was the primary person I worked with, which was really lucky to have somebody who was kind of steady and not having to go out and scramble every day for a new thing. But that's kind of the in a nutshell from there to here. But along the way, have been really fortunate to be able to work at a ton of great studios around the world, in Los Angeles and New York and here and in London. And so I really feel fortunate to have been able to do what I've done so far. And with the new sort of the way the business is, it's kind of exciting as well as scary at the same time. But it's everything changes and evolves, and it's a the music business is always changing, always new artists, always new things. So it's a lot of fun. Since I started, how my job has changed over the years. I started in '88 when I graduated from college, and at that time, digital meaning tape digital, like 3348, and in Nashville, which was really the only place that it took off, was the 32 track format. Those were just really starting on the upswing, and everything was primarily still analog tape, 24 track analog, and it was done, records were done the traditional kind of way, which was you go to a studio, you came and tracked, then you did overdubs, then you mixed it, and all of that happened on analog tape. And vocal tuning was very, very much in its infancy. Any kind of editing to us was, if you liked this take and that take, then you took the 2-inch tape and you cut them and put them together, and that was kind of the way you did it. And so from there, when we first started using say analog or a digital tape, then you had, my goodness, 48 tracks. All, how can you ever fill that up? Or and then it got to, well, if we slave 2 of these machines, then we have 96 tracks, and that you can kind of get overkill there. And everything was mixed on an analog console, so any sort of recall, any sort of change to a mix was kind of difficult and expensive, time-consuming, all of those things. And then we got into the radar system, which was mainly just sort of a replacement for the 24-track analog machine. It was a digital recorder that just had sort of limited editing capabilities. Then we got into the computer thing, and all of those, at this point, some people grow up knowing only one thing, and I'm fortunate to have been through all that and to see what kind of effort it takes to do one as opposed to the other, and what benefits, detriments, anything that comes one to the other. And at some point they all just become tools, and it's all how you use the tools that you have. Technically, things have gone from an analog piece of gear like a compressor or an EQ that you had to plug into, to plug-ins, to all this kind of stuff. And it used to be, when I first started, you wanted everything to be a piece of wire, to have no color whatsoever. Now, just from a personal aspect, I like to have lots of color and run it through all the analog stuff before it goes into the computer. So it's just different ways of looking at things. And to make an analog tape sound its best, you had to bias an analog tape. And if anybody needs to know what bias is, probably can look that up somewhere else to get a further explanation of it. But each track, we figured out we liked a certain bias on the snare. If the kick was going on that track, the bass, the guitars, the vocals, whatever, we'd bias all those tracks differently, so that you really try to maximize what the analog tape did for each individual track. And it's a little more, so you don't really have that capability in the digital world with converters, although you could use different converters on every channel if you wanted to, but that's sort of prohibitive. But technically, the way mics were constructed, because excuse me, in like in the 40s, mics were all based around tube amplifiers, and then the 60s and 70s they all changed over to solid state amplifiers, and then the tubes have kind of come back into vogue, and so gear kind of comes in and out of vogue as far as outboard gear. And then from a business model, the business is